Really, did you think that there was any chance that I was gonna skip out on talking about Mortal Kombat? Ever since it was, incepted, ever since it was conceived, I was like, yeah. If there was any video game property to kind of give it a proper reboot treatment, it would be Mortal Kombat. And we're finally here amidst some delays and some mild complications when it came to the whole COVID ordeal, whatever. But now, releasing in both theaters and HBO Max, we got the Mortal Kombat reboot 2021. And these are some very big shoes for the film to fill, apparently, because a lot of people consider the original 1995, I believe, Mortal Kombat by Paul W.S. Anderson, who's made a reputation of himself to adapt video games into movies, to very low qualifying results, but I digress. However, strangely, and I'll mention why I say strangely, is that a lot of people strangely consider that original Mortal Kombat movie from 95 to be the quote-unquote the best video game movie of all time, considering that the bar is not necessarily set too high. I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm actually in the minority, where I don't think the movie's terrible, but it's very hard for me to go and be like, yes, that's miles better than Prince of Persia with Jake Gyllenhaal. I find it very difficult for me to put that movie kind of on a pedestal. So there's really not a whole lot of affinity with that original movie of me going into this new one with a particular set of standards. So with that original R-rated trailer being the only real thing to kind of cling on to, being like, okay, I see the fatalities, I see the homages to the characters, how does this hold up as not just a video game movie, but just a movie in general? And I gotta say, I actually really enjoyed this movie. This actually is, in my opinion, hot take, the best video game movie made. Knocking over that original 95 version. Now, with that said, that bar is still pretty low. We still haven't had our Dark Knight of video game movies. We still haven't had that quintessential film that's not just a great video game movie, but also a great movie, period. Because that's the thing. This is actually a pretty fun Mortal Kombat movie. It's a pretty enjoyable video game movie. It's an okay movie. Like, okay through and through. Because this is the type of movie where if you're a Mortal Kombat fan, you are going to potentially love. And then if you are a cinephile, you're either going to get pissed or you're going to be much more comforted by the notion of watching this at home on HBO Max. And that's the tricky job that I had as a person watching this, because there's a part of me that there were two brains that I was having while watching this movie. That half of me was like trying to be that critical, very unbiased movie person, and then the other part of my brain was trying to really hone in on the Mortal Kombat-ness of this film, being a fan of the video games and being a gamer myself. And that's the thing that this movie really excels at, is being a really great love letter to the people who are fans of the Mortal Kombat games. And I gotta be honest, I've seen already some people saying that they still prefer the 95 over this one, but it's almost like it kind of balances itself out, because trust me, there are some things in this movie that it doesn't nail. And it's kind of hard to get into some of them without going into some spoilers, but let's just say that there's some things that they take some liberties with, and in certain aspects they kind of pay off, at least for me, from this interpretation of the Mortal Kombat mythology going forward into potential sequels. And then there's others where I'm like, why was this done this way? Why was that done that way? It's not terrible. From a movie standard, it's okay, but from a Mortal Kombat video game perspective, it didn't 100% hit the mark. Whether it be from performances, or at least the direction of a performance, or the direction of a character, or the fact that certain staples of the games, such as the concept of a tournament, are not 100% here, really, to begin with. And that has a tendency to happen when you have a screenwriter who's never written a script before and a director who's never directed a movie before. And it shows from time to time, from, like I said, that movie perspective. From the video game perspective, I can tell that the writers and the director, probably more than likely, like 90% a chance, they grew up playing the video games and they love the video games, and it clearly shows throughout various spots in this movie where a lot of characters are done right. From Kung Lao, I would say Kung Lao is probably one of the better ones, to our two main staples here, of course, Sub-Zero and Scorpion. Although Scorpion, I believe, I don't know if maybe it was like a budget thing or whatever, but he is criminally underused. Sub-Zero, a little better so. One of the biggest surprises is actually Kano. Josh Lawson, who plays Kano, is damn near perfect. He stole every scene, and I was actually cracking up. I can see if anybody gets annoyed by him, but then again, that's Kano. He never shuts up. He's supposed to get on your nerves, and strangely, he was not getting on my nerves. I can see him getting on the other characters' nerves, but there was just something about him that just cracked me up. There were a couple of lines that he had, or at least the delivery of the lines, no matter how cheesy they came off as, that he was able to sell. So props to this guy, and it makes sense because I did a little bit of research on him. He's not only an actor, but he's also a writer. He's actually, believe it or not, the only Oscar nominee amongst this cast. Now, not for acting. He was nominated for Best Live-Action Short back in 2016, I believe, for a short film he wrote. And that's the thing. He's got a strong writing background, an Oscar-nominated writing background, and because of that, I'm almost willing to bet that a good chunk of his lines were either improv, or at least the direction of the lines were improv by himself, and he's able to hone Kano down, and he ended up being one of my favorite characters out of the entire ensemble. And many others are also pretty passable, pretty decent, like Jax and Sonya and stuff like that. But they do something with these characters, even with Kano, that I can definitely see some people getting annoyed by. This is actually one of the liberties that I was okay with. Like, I wasn't 100% behind, but I was like, you know what? For this being the cinematic Mortal Kombat universe, I can kind of vibe with it. Let's just say that if you weren't a huge fan of how they did the organic web shooters in Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, you might get a little annoyed with a particular thing they do here in the new Mortal Kombat reboot. However, amongst the entirety of the cast, and even Shang Tsung was good, everybody, whatever, but there's two standouts, unfortunately, on the negative side. One is, again, again, I'm going into this review with two brains, one as a movie critic and one as a Mortal Kombat fan. From a Mortal Kombat fan, I would say the biggest missed opportunity here as amongst the casting, actually two really. Like I mentioned before, Scorpion, I feel like he's very underused because he's barely in the movie. He's awesome, and the actor, the Japanese actor who plays him, nails it, but use him more. I mean, this is a Scorpion. I can only imagine how slightly irate Ed Boon could potentially be, because Ed Boon, this is his baby, and the fact that he's barely in the movie, it's like, ugh, I could only imagine him getting a little annoyed. But so he could have been used a little better, and then somebody who could have been directed a little better or written a little better was Raiden. I don't know what happened with Raiden, but Raiden is supposed to be this mentor figure, this, the coach behind the team of Earthrealm warriors. And yet he comes across as a McDonald's manager who's stuck at his job and he doesn't want to be there. The actor himself is doing just fine. I'm not saying that the actor didn't want to be there, but the character himself, it seems like he just doesn't want to be Raiden. And he came across as a little too brash. And I know that's probably a new direction they're trying to go with him in these movies, but I'm so used to Raiden being that person to look to and be that sense of hope, that sense of management, that sense of leadership. And even when he doesn't know what to do, he can always fall back on that whole "I must consult with the elder gods" line and do that instead. And he never really gave that vibe, and I would probably say that's probably one of my biggest issues as far as from a Mortal Kombat fan perspective. Now, from a movie critic perspective, that I think a lot of people can agree is that as great as they are at their craft, stunt performers are not always the best actors. And unfortunately, that's my segue to our main cipher for our audience, our anchor for our audience, the person we're supposed to relate with the most, and yet he made me wince a handful of times, and that's unfortunately, God bless him. Like I said, I know he's got stunts in spades. He's probably nailed, really well, talented with that craft. But from an acting standpoint, this is what happens when you throw. He might be good in other properties, but here, when you put something like a stunt performer to actually act and show emotion behind the director who's never done a movie before, you end up with a performance done by Lewis Tan, who plays our main actor here, Cole Young, who's actually an original character just for this film. And if you're gonna bring in a new character that we've never seen before in the Mortal Kombat legacy, then you better make him resonate with us. And unfortunately, I don't know about you guys, but for me, it just did not pan out 100%. Not even 90%, 100%, because he's kind of terrible. I gotta be honest, he is wood. I have not seen a wooden performance in a really long time, and to be honest, Lewis Tan in this movie, like I said, he made me wince a handful of times where I'm like, can we get back to like the other stuff with Kung Lao, Liu Kang, all that stuff, all the people that are actually filling in the roles rather nicely. Can we go back to that? But without, like I said, going into too many spoilers, let's just say that I think we're just gonna have to get used to him. And while I'm in that part of my brain that's meant to be a movie critic, another thing that the movie, like I said, from a Mortal Kombat fan perspective, it was really nailing were some of the Easter eggs or callbacks to the legacy of Mortal Kombat that I can tell the filmmakers are through and through about, that they're huge fans of, and it comes across really well. There are some Easter eggs that are very kind of mildly in your face, and there's others that are a little like, okay, they are meant to be hunted down like an Easter egg hunt, and they're pretty cool. They're kind of in the background, or they're kind of on the wall, or things like that. And I'm not gonna lie, they kind of got a smile out of me. There's actually one in particular, and it's a line of dialogue that's not just an Easter egg for Mortal Kombat fans. It's actually an Easter egg for fighting game fans. Like, it kind of touched me a little bit because I wasn't expecting it, and so when this line of dialogue was thrown in, I was like, oh. Yeah, back to a annoying yet simpler time of my childhood, so that was pretty cool. But there's a difference between Easter eggs that casual moviegoers are gonna miss, and they're just Easter eggs to cater to the fans and for the fans to come in and kind of explain it and go off on a tangent and kind of geek out about it and have fun with it. It's another to also kind of take really vital plot elements of certain character arcs and have them be only understandable to those fans and not to casual moviegoers. And this point was proven when I was walking out and my girlfriend's friend asked the question about a particular character as to why they were in a certain place. And I knew, because I've played the games, I knew about the characters, I knew about the lineage, but she didn't. And that's where I'm like, okay, this ain't an Easter egg, this is actually a legitimate plot device, and yet it wasn't covered, and except for a couple of lines of dialogue, but they're very vague. And I even, since I do have an HBO Max subscription, I went back and kind of skimmed through it, and I'm like, yeah, there's a couple of lines that are just a little too vague for comfort, and some people are not going to grasp onto that. So from a Mortal Kombat fan perspective, it was okay. From a critic, I'm like, you know what, that's the thing about these video game adaptations, that often they end up, you know, leaning a little bit too much towards that video game fan base and not enough to, you know, being a good movie first. And I think that's where the priorities need to kind of change in the future, should we ever want that Dark Knight kind of revelation to be like, oh my god, this is not just a comic book movie, this is a great movie, period. We need to have that happen for some kind of video game property. I don't know with what video game property that's going to happen with. Mortal Kombat is still an option. I would still say that I'm looking forward to a sequel with what they kind of leave with here at the end, minus a couple of, like I said, some of the liberties that I'm just going to have to get used to. But aside from that, Mortal Kombat, I would say it's a fun time. If you're not willing to watch it in the theater, I still kind of recommend checking it out on HBO Max if you have a subscription or you know somebody who has a subscription, because I gotta be honest, I'm bewildered by some of the people who just do not approve of this, but yet they approve of the 95 original. And don't get me wrong, there's some things here to still kind of divulge into that are a little bit spoilery, like how they treat certain characters or how some characters kind of go out. The fatalities, for example, I didn't even cover the fatalities. The whole reason as to why a lot of people were hyped up for this movie is that it was rated R. And the fatalities themselves, unfortunately, they did something that, again, going back to the two halves of my brain, the Mortal Kombat fan me is going in looking at the fatalities and going, yes, they are kick ass. They are bloody, they are gruesome, they are like, yes, they packed the punch, no pun intended. The movie critic part of me is like, when you see the characters get introduced, you know for a fact who's going to get the fatality and who's not, or who's going to die but in the tamest way possible, and who's going to get the most gruesome one. And that's the problem with the fatalities for me personally, is that the fatalities work best when they happen to characters that you care about. And let's just say that you know who, once they get introduced, you know who's going to be safe and you know who's not. If you are asking who's that, they're probably going to be getting a really brutal fatality for you to look at and go, cool, and then move on. And you're not going to really remember who the fuck that happened to. And that's probably one of the things that works well with the games, is that you have these beloved characters, and when you're fighting each other, whether it be locally or online, multiplayer, whatever, and you see these fatalities happen, you wince not just because they're graphic, but because you like that character, and that's your character you play it as. I think that's one of the missed opportunities about the movie. And that's kind of, like I said, that's one of the dichotomies I'm having with this movie, is that as a Mortal Kombat fan, I'd say it's a really fun, enjoyable time. As a movie critic, it's okay. If you want to catch it in theaters, no harm, no foul, but I wouldn't blame you at all, once again, if you checked it out on HBO Max. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know what you guys thought of the movie in the comments below. Like and share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Stay humble.